All right, everyone, let's get into question 8 today. This is talking about, we're continuing our discussion on the infinity of God. Go ahead and open it up so we see where we're at in the outline. I do this every time, by the way, just because I think context is really important for understanding something as complex as the Summa. So being able to see kind of where we're at in the discussion, I really see as crucial for understanding Aquinas' argument as a whole. Otherwise, it's really easy to get lost. So that's why I kind of go through opening up the different sections every time. But anyway, here we are, still in the divine essence, issue of how God exists, and we are in the infinity of God, wrapping that up today. And we talked about the infinity of God in question 7. Question 8 is then about the existence of God in things. In other words, given that God is infinite, what does that mean as far as how his infinity interacts with his creatures, and indeed with all things besides himself? And how do we deal with that given that we've ruled out pantheism several times already in the Summa? So, this is one of those places where, and this is what Aquinas does so well and why the Summa is so massive, is it's the careful division of saying, when we talk about the infinity of God in things, we will go this far and no farther. It is saying, if we go this far, we wind up in pantheism. If we go only this far, we wind up denying the infinity of God. And so there's a point between those two extremes where the truth of the Christian position comes through, and that's what Aquinas is seeking here with questions like question 8. So existence of God in things. So first, there's a couple definitions that these terms don't necessarily come up in the Summa, but Father Garrigou-Lagrange mentions them in his commentary, and I found this quite helpful. So the distinction between immensity and omnipresence. So immensity, the ability to be in all places at once. The inability to be circumscribed by anything. So, and then omnipresence, to actually be in all places at once. And we want to say that God has both of those. He is wholly immense. He cannot be contained in anything, but that he is actually in places. So those ideas aren't explicitly spelled out, but they're behind, they're underlying a lot of this discussion. So it's worth it while to be aware of that distinction there. All right, we got 4 articles then today. Whether God is in all things, whether God is everywhere, whether God is everywhere by his essence, presence, and power, and whether to be everywhere belongs to God alone. Okay. Our objections to Article 1. Scripture tells us God is above all things. Aquinas quotes one of the Psalms in that case. And if you're above all things, you're not in all things. All right? To be in something is to be contained. God contains rather than is contained. Again, going back up here to his immensity. Because God is immense, he cannot be contained. So that would seem to say he cannot be in something. God's power makes its actions extend to things far removed from him, making it, I should have written the word him here, let me correct that, making it unnecessary that he be in anything. In other words, it's superfluous to talk about God being in things. He's powerful enough to avoid doing it. And then the really interesting one here, God is not in the demons, therefore he is not in all things. And the answer to that one I find quite fascinating. We'll get to that in a minute. Argument from authority. A thing is wherever it operates. Isaiah 26:12 tells us that God operates in all things, therefore he must be in all things. And then logically, let's go through this. So God is not present in things as essence or accident. Okay? So he isn't present in you in the way that your essence, your humanity is present in you, and he isn't present in you in the way that your accidents, like blue eyes or green eyes or brown hair, are present in you. But God is present in things as through being their cause. We saw that back in proof 2, right? God is the ultimate cause. We are all of his effects. Aristotle proved this in physics by demonstrating the moved and the mover are linked. An effect is linked to its cause, and the cause is in the effect. The one is in the other. By virtue of being a cause, whatever is a cause of something, it's in that effect. God is the mover of all and cause of all, proofs 1 and 2. God is in anything that has being, which is all things by definition, since he is being itself. If he ceased to be, all things would cease to have being. So because of that, because God is being in himself, he is existence itself. If he stopped existing, all other things would immediately cease to exist. The implication of that is that he is a cause not only in, like we talked about in video 2, or in the videos on question 2, he isn't a cause like, one domino knocking over another domino. He's what we called a proper cause then. And because of that, he is actively in something as an ongoing cause. And if you want more on proper cause, I laid that out a great deal in the video on the 5 proofs, which is the part 2 video for question 2. All right. Objections answered. God is above all things in his essence. He is in all things as the cause of their being. So pretty much just restating what we said. Objection 1 would be true if we were saying that God was in something by essence or by accident, but that's not what we're saying. 2, corporeal things must be contained in something. That's not true of spiritual things. Okay? And that's so in other words, the confusion found in objection 2 is coming from, the confusion comes because we have to talk about spiritual things by way of similitude. We only understand corporeal things, so then sometimes when we assign corporeal language to incorporeal things, things get confusing. And then action at a distance is always done through a medium regardless of power, but God acts immediately. He is immanent to us and not through a medium. Very important point of Christian theology, of course, God's immanence and his transcendence. And we want to be very careful not to say that God is only one or the other. You can find many great heresies who will fall into traps by saying overstressing God's immanence or his transcendence, or denying one or the other. And then the one I said was really interesting, that God is completely absent from the demons in the deformity of their sin, but their being is still from him, and he is therefore in them only to the extent that they have been. In other words, so long as a thing, even a demon, exists, God is in it as the cause is to the effect. And to understand this, you kind of have to go back to the definition of evil that I think, let me see where that was. It was either in simplicity or perfection. I think it was perfection back here in question 4. Or maybe it was simplicity. That's, in any case, it was back there a ways where we looked at how the question of evil, what evil actually is not a thing itself. It's the privation of being. It's the privation of something. It's the lack of actualization. And so the demons, through their absolute evil, have uncreated themselves so that there is nothing there except a raw being. They have existence. That is the only thing about them that is not uncreated in them. That is not a complete corruption and removal of a good. Fascinating way to look at evil. So, Article 2, whether God is everywhere. Our objections: incorporeal things are not, by definition, in any place. Therefore, God, as incorporeal, is not in any place and he's not everywhere. Just as something indivisible can't be in all times at once, so something indivisible cannot be in all places at the same time. So for God to be everywhere, it seems like he would have to be divided and have a portion of himself be in every place. We know that's not true based on question 3. Something holy in one place cannot be in part anywhere else. God is indivisible, and therefore if he is in one place, he is holy there and nowhere else. So kind of the inverse of objection 2 there. Oh, but Jeremiah 23:24 says God fills heaven and earth. So what do we do with that? God is in all places in the sense that they are things and he is in all things. We saw that in the previous article. God is not everywhere as a body is, since that would exclude other things from being there. So, if God was everywhere in the way that our objections seem to be thinking about him, then nothing else could be there either, because he'd be corporeal in the place. He is everywhere in being in everything that fills every place. That's kind of an extension of the argument we just saw, because he is in everything, and everything is by definition everywhere. God is everywhere. All right. Objections answered. God is not everywhere by corporeal contact, but through his power, very similar to what we were saying in Article 1. God is indivisible in the sense of being above the genus of the continuous or successive. Therefore, objection 2 does not apply to his indivisibility. In other words, you and I are... Let me think how to put this. Things belonging to the genus of the continuous or the successive can only be in one continuous place or moment at a time. But God, being beyond every genus, is not bound by that rule. It doesn't apply to him. It's not part of his essence to only be in one place or one time at a time. So then we do away with objection 2. Apply to 3, God is not everywhere by totality of quantity, but by totality of essence, just as the soul is everywhere in the body by its essence. In other words, God isn't everywhere in the sense that his one being is right here, but that, and the soul metaphor that Aquinas uses is a good one, because it's like, okay, my soul is in my hand and it's in my head. It's animating me, as I'm able to move and everything. It's not like the soul, if the soul was somewhere by quantity, we'd have to say that there's one place in me that it is. But no, the soul inhabits me totally by way of essence. So kind of a confusing distinction there, but you wrestle around with that a bit in your head, and I think it will click. All right, Article 3, whether God is everywhere by essence, presence, and power. Our objections. God is not essentially in things. In other words, he's not in things by essence. We saw that up here in Article 1. Therefore, he is not in things by essence. Okay? To be in something by presence means the same as to be in something by essence, so this second descriptor is superfluous. God is the principle of all things by his power, knowledge, and will. He is not in things by his knowledge and will. Therefore, it doesn't follow that he would be in things by his power. And God is in some things in a special way by grace. This is a special mode of God's existence in that thing. Since this is true of grace, it seems that it should also be true of other perfections added to a thing's substance. I'll be honest, I didn't quite get what was going on with that objection, and it doesn't help that Aquinas basically says we'll get to that later. So I'll only briefly touch on that one. All right, St. Gregory is telling us, when he expounds the Song of Songs, chapter 5, that in that chapter, according to St. Gregory, we learn that God is in all things by presence, power, and substance, or essence. All right. God is in all things as their cause. God is in rational creatures in a special way through grace, and this will be discussed in question 12. That's where he's kind of referencing that objection 4 and saying, we'll get to that later, don't worry about it. God is in all things by his power, as a king is present in the whole kingdom by his power. Okay? And that's contrary to the Manichees, who were a heretical group in early Christianity that said that God was limited by the corporeal because the spiritual cannot interact with the corporeal. And God is in things through his presence. So just to put a cap on that, contrary to the Manichees, we're saying, no, God's power doesn't have that limit, and he is everywhere. God is in all things through his presence, in the same way that all things in a house are present to anyone in the house. This is said in contrast to those who twist Scripture to claim that God disdains to be present in corporeal things. And a thing is present by its essence in anywhere its essence may be, but God's essence may be everywhere. This is set against those who claim that God did not immediately create everything, but only the first creature. This last illustrates the danger of arguing from God by way of infinite regression, which is something we talked about again back in part 2 video of question 2, where we discussed proper causes. So I think that if you missed the discussion on proper causes, you probably ought to either read the notes I have on that back for question 2 or go watch that video, because as I'm doing this discussion here, it seems like it's coming up quite a bit. All right. Objections answered. God is not in all things by their essence, but by his own. It belongs to the essence of God to be everywhere, but he isn't in something by way of its essence in the way that humanity is in you by your essence. Reply to 2, a thing can be present when it is in sight. This is distinct from being present by way of essence. In other words, you don't know what you're talking about. Objection 2, that is a meaningful distinction. Knowledge and will make things more truly present in God. Power makes God present in things as an agent is present in an action. So Aquinas is saying you're right to group those 3 together, but knowledge and will are going in this direction and power goes in that direction. And finally, grace is a special case since it alone makes God a known and loved object in the thing it is added to. And I guess we're getting back to that one in question 12, so I'm just going to leave it alone for now. And finally, Article 4. Whether to be everywhere belongs to God alone. Well, probably. The universe, these are kind of interesting objections. There's 6 of them, which usually when there's that many, they're all kind of quick hitters, so we'll move through them fairly quick. The universal and primary matter are everywhere. Neither of these is God. Number is everywhere, according to Wisdom 11:21, which, if you remember from some of our previous arguments according to authority, there's a verse that says he's given everything weight, measure, and number. Okay? If an infinite body existed, it would be everywhere. The soul is whole in all of the parts of its body. Therefore, if there was only one creature and nothing else in creation, its soul would be everywhere. I'd love some. I mean, you either like this stuff or you don't. It's like either you roll your eyes at an objection like that and think that's just so stupid. Of course, there wouldn't be any one thing. Or you say that's kind of cool that we get to think about crazy hypotheticals like that. And then Augustine tells us the soul lives where it sees. The soul can see all things and is therefore everywhere. St. Ambrose tells us to be everywhere belongs to God alone. And now we are going to go back to a distinction that we saw in the last video, a distinction between absolute infinity and relative infinity. So there is a distinction between being everywhere as a whole and being everywhere according to a thing's part. To be everywhere as a whole would be to be absolutely infinite. To be everywhere according to the parts of yourself would be relatively infinite. The latter may be true of things. They can be relatively infinite. They can be everywhere according to their parts, but the former is true of God alone. If everything was white, whiteness would be everywhere, but only accidentally. Okay? God is not everywhere accidentally, but essentially, since nothing can exist except by him. In other words, even if everything was white, and whiteness is now everywhere, it's not everywhere in the same way that we said up here that God is in all things and God is everywhere. We're saying a very different thing about whiteness than what we just said about God. So Aquinas is, again, parsing, making clear, careful distinctions. Objections answered. Prime matter and the universal are everywhere, but not by a single mode of existence. In other words, prime matter, which is everything, is everywhere according to my existence, your existence. In other words, it falls into this relative infinity where it's everywhere according to a thing's parts. Number is everywhere accidentally, and therefore relatively. The universe is everywhere according to its parts. I don't know if I read that one or if I skipped over it, but the universe is a kind of body, and by definition it is everywhere. And yeah, again, it falls under relative infinity. Then if an infinite body existed, you'd probably fill in the gaps for these other ones. You've started to get the pattern here. They're all applying to relative infinity. If an infinite body existed, it would be everywhere according to its parts. And if there was only one animal, its soul would be everywhere accidentally. In other words, it would be everywhere just in the same way that whiteness would be everywhere in our hypothetical example there, not in the way that God is essentially must be everywhere. And then reply to 6. The soul sees everywhere and therefore, in a sense, lives anywhere, but it only resides in its body and therefore is not everywhere. I suspect that this is a case where we'd kind of have to dig into the Augustine quote a little bit and understand how it's being misinterpreted. I don't know, for me, when I read that stuff, I'm at least momentarily satisfied enough to say, okay, let's move on and not get too worked up about it. I mean, Augustine said something that sounds like it's contradicting what Aquinas is saying, but it doesn't, because the soul only lives in the body. All right, everyone, that is question 8. Next time, I think we only have 2 articles, so it'll be a nice short video for a change. Anyway, happy reading. Enjoy your Aquinas. Focus on big ideas, key terms, and I'll be back with you in a couple days with question 9. See you later. Goodbye.